Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too. I just want to let everybody know that this past Tuesday, we were successful in stopping HB 1204 in the Senate Judiciary Committee. This was the Uniform Power of Attorney Act that was roaring like a locomotive through the legislature, and three of us got up and testified out there. I know that the senators that were on the committee got quite a few emails, and that's all been appreciated, and we were able to stop it, and hopefully we'll be able to get involved and get it done. But I was here a couple weeks ago and talked about it, and we did it, so thank you.
Well done.
Well, and I would just mention that we're running out of time on petitions to legislature. The end of the month are due. We do have some openings, although we do have a couple of the districts in Sioux Falls area that have all three positions filled on the Democratic side. But if anybody has any thoughts at all that they might like to run someday, now is the time to do it. Talk with me after the meeting if you'd like. If you'd like some practical advice, Jamie Smith, who's in the legislature right now, District 15, is sitting in the back there. So step up, or if you know a friend you'd like us to contact, we'll do that. Okay, we're going to get right into it here. We have our candidates for the City Council for at-large A, and John Paulson and Jeff Brekke are here. And so I'll invite them to come up. And I told them we'd give them each a couple minutes to do a little opening and introduce themselves, and then we'll open up to questions. And I'm going to try to monitor the questions a little bit, so please make sure the questions are in the form of questions. Any speeches we'll put off. You can do them at a later date. So if you get a little too long in your question, we probably will cut you off so we can get as many questions in as possible. So if John and Janet would like to come up. I don't think I have to explain which is which here. So. And I warn you that Bruce is back there, the mic's out here. So. We'll start
What a great crowd. It's really nice to be with you today, and appreciate the invitation. Real close. Hey, here we go. I'll start over. Great crowd, and thanks for the invitation to be here. I've been working with a group of volunteers we call Community Connectors, and we have meetings that draw quite a few, and it's great to be with a group like this. Out of that group of Community Connectors, we've established some themes for my campaign. One of them is working together, planning our future, and the other is listening and leading. And I'd like to show you how that works as we go through your questions, and look forward to your conversation with me, certainly. I'm a Sioux Falls native, as is my wife Jane over here, and we got married at Augustana University and began our life together and pursuing my career in healthcare administration. So we lived away for a while in Peoria, Illinois, actually, and wanted to come back and raise our daughter here. So fortunately, we were able to do that 35 years ago. And during those years, I had worked at Buchanan Hospital, and I just finished 30 years at Sanford Health a couple of years ago. So that's been my professional career. I've also had the opportunity to be involved in community leadership roles. Currently, I serve on the Sioux Falls Planning Commission. Also been involved in the three versions of Sioux Falls Tomorrow, a community-based planning project for visioning for our future. I've served on various other community boards, and I'm active in my neighborhood association. I'm running for city council because I want to represent and serve you. I have a keen interest in public service that's been nurtured on my experiences on the planning commission. I feel I can bring something from my administrative background and community leadership roles to serve on the city council and serve you. I have four things I'm really interested in. One is that we as a council and a mayor would work together to establish the ground rules for how we would move forward, what the vision would be that we would want to see fulfilled for Sioux Falls. Within that, three things are important, obviously: roles and responsibilities, Secondly, standards, plans, budgets that are worked on together. And thirdly, bringing people to help find innovative solutions. Secondly, would want to review the decision-making process and to ensure that the information that's required for people to understand what's going on and to get behind it and support it would be available and part of the process. Thirdly, that we would provide for citizen engagement in the actions of the city and bring them to help with solutions. And then lastly, to address the community resource needs we have, and you'll see a long list of those. I got those from our Community Connector group, and they are important that we lift up and pursue as a community together. They range, of course, from our economic and workforce development interests, housing, safety, and the future of the Sioux Falls community as a whole. So thank you very much for having me, and I'll look forward to your questions.
Hi, my name is Janet Brekke, and I'll just give you a little bit about me and why I'm running for City Council. I have a passion for this city and actually have had some service in it. My career has been entirely with this, my 38-year professional career has been in the city of Sioux Falls. I started right after I left law school at USD as a deputy state's attorney for Minnehaha County. And I served there for 4 years. After that, I went to the city, and during that period, I served under 5 mayors and 3 forms of government, beginning with Rick Noby, Joe Cooper, Jack White, Mayor Hansen, Mayor Munson. During those years, I implemented 2 forms of government, the 3 commission to 5 commission form of government, and the current strong mayor policy setting council form of government. My mantra under all of those administrations was to do this right, and that is how we did it. After leaving the city attorney's office, I opened up Honey Baked Ham Company and Cafe here in Sioux Falls and ran and operated that business for 13 years. I sold it a year ago, and that is when I made the decision that I thought I had a unique, what I call my tri-cornered hat of experience, being in government, in business, and in law. And I started thinking that maybe politics might be a place where I could utilize that background in a way to help. And I selected the city attorney's, or excuse me, the city council position A as a place where I thought I could best utilize my experience. There are 3 pillars to my campaign. The first one is good government, no nonsense. And I have some specific ideas as to how to change the form of government a little bit in order to make it more effective. I am frequently asked when I'm on the speaking tour, do I think that this form of government, that the mayoral position, has evolved to too much power? And what I tell people is, no, I think that the city council hasn't evolved to be powerful enough. Because when I describe this form of government, I'm very careful to say strong mayor policy setting council. Because the council is supposed to be the premier policy setting body for the city by setting broad policy initiatives. They've never done that. So I'm proposing to structurally alter that so that would be an actual part of what their process is. And I'm proposing a long-range, citywide strategic planning process that is fully transparent with maximum opportunities for public involvement. This will allow the city council to set the broad policy initiatives and itemize them in order of priority. For example, whether it be economic development or whether it be public protection. What is the city's #1 priorities? And then you have goals and objectives and funding for them. So that's something I'm interested in speaking about, if any of you would like to ask me questions about. The other items that I'm most focused on are what I call the city's growth issues. To me, there are 3 growth issues that are happening as a result of our rapid growth. One of them is diversity, and I've got a specific program to address that. At the moment, the city's just giving lip service to that issue, and it needs programming and funding. The second is cleanliness, and the third is safety. They go hand in hand. And I have specific programs in mind for each of them. The One is a public improvement program that addresses our deteriorating neighborhoods, which also has a backhanded way of addressing crime. And the other one is a public safety program, which deals with assistance in our workforce and and helps with our actual drug activity. So those are three things that I'd like to visit with you about. If you'd like to ask me questions about them, however, I'm most anxious to answer any questions that you have and what your concerns are for the city. Thank you.
I would like Janet to please address how she sees the need for substance abuse treatment, mental health with our jail system, corrections, law enforcement. Might you speak a second about that?
When I talk about public safety, because of my background in government, I see it a little bit differently. I get tired when I hear candidates say, well, yep, we're going to beef up that police department. If beefing up the police department worked, it would be utilized all across the country. We need to be fighting crime on all fronts. And one of the ways that you can fight crime is by eliminating what I call the antiquated governmental systems and how we treat our mentally ill and our addiction, our people with addictions. And what I'm talking about here is if we put into place government structures that are designed to treat these individuals like patients and not like criminals, that we have the potential to actually to reclaim lives and reclaim our workforce. And if you reclaim your workforce, right now 87% of the penitentiary population is there for mental illness and or drug and or addiction related crimes. Our own Glory House has a 62% recovery rate, and in its new expanded program hopes to have a 75% recovery rate dealing with just that kind of crime. If we can recreate our systems so that they look more like hospitals and these people are treated more like hospitals, we can actually funnel them through our own Glory House and actually have a return. Their new goal is 75%. So if you take 75% out of 87%, sorry, and return them to the workforce, you've dealt with your workforce, you're dealing with your workforce development issue. The other piece of that issue is what does that do to the demand for drugs? You've taken 75% of that 87%, and they're no longer using, and their children are no longer involved, and they're returned to their homes. Now you not only have returned these people back to being productive citizens in society, but you've actually reduced the demand for drugs. And in my opinion, one of the best ways to go after the drug trade is to reduce demand.
Thank you.
Well, I might just comment on what I think can help contribute to the solutions. One of those is the triage center program that we worked on in the communities, so that there's a mechanism to get people directed to what it is they really need, as opposed to another night in jail, an opportunity to participate in a mental health course of service or addiction treatment. And I think that's a good example of intergovernmental cooperation, which is going to also be necessary for us to have enough resources and to make sure the resources are in the right places to do what we need to for that key population that we've been talking about.
Thank you.
Hi, I just have a question for people. I guess it's my personal opinion, and I feel like in terms of public safety for our community that rifles out there are a danger to our community. We haven't experienced the massacre yet, but I think it's a possibility. And I guess I'm wondering what your viewpoint is on a ban or on something for that for our community. It's not happening here. They're not doing it in Washington. But we have a government here. And I'm wondering, when you compare that government, what are your thoughts about all these?
Did everybody hear Sandy's question? It was about gun control, local gun control. Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm on on the AR-15, it's a semi-automatic, not gun control in general.
Okay.
One specific
One specific
gun
item.
that I feel should just be given to soldiers who are in war and nobody else.
Right.
But it's here in our community.
I agree.
Gun stores are selling them, thank heavens Dick's is not anymore, but Shields is, and there are other gun stores. What are we gonna do about it for our community?
Well, it's certainly a national issue. It's being addressed by some states, and could be something that has consideration for what is it that the local government might do in a situation like that, Sandy. I think what we really need to focus on about that is what is the ultimate solution and how does that get affected and who has to be involved in it. I think the conversation has started. You know, it's obvious that people are concerned and lifting up issues like you just have. And I think we need to see where that goes as a community conversation so that whatever might come of it would be done with the community in mind.
I guess I would come out probably strongly in your camp on that. I've never understood assault weapons and why the NRA is so strong. You know, that it has, guns have to be so broadly accepted. There's never any reason, to my way of thinking, that military weapons should be out in the community. But you're right, this is more than that. And my card-carrying cousins, you know, back on the farm, which just whacked me over the head about this, my card-carrying NRA cousins who I go hunting with every October, you know, because I have these debates with them, you know, all the time, and I get that mentality, but I just don't think the only reason they can have that is because they live out in the rural, you know, the rural populations, and they don't see how threatening that is to those of us that live in the urban areas. So while that is, you know, my philosophy on it, we don't have a lot to do with that at the local level, but there are some things we do at the local level. I know that there was issues about carrying concealed weapons in the workplace with concealed weapon permits, and there was some, you know, debate about that. And in those areas, I would probably be the person who would come down, not in favor of being allowed to carry concealed weapons, you know, in parking lots or in businesses.
Paying, Chairman,
Yeah, can I get back after you're finished?
paying double for per parking space in this new hotel, is that just another way of subsidizing a big business, or am I missing something?
Oh, it is.
That's a new one. I'm hearing that for the first time.
You haven't heard that the parking spaces are double the average size of a parking space? Cost.
The cost is going to be double. You've got me with that one. That doesn't sound right.
Big parking ramp with a hotel on it.
We're gonna check. To me, catch me off guard, so I'm just gonna go with it on
I
the fly.
apologize.
That's okay, you don't have to apologize. I'm gonna go with it on the fly. Here's the thing, parking rates should be set, there should be a structure for setting them. And if there's to be any changes in them, there should be a reason why the changes should be required to allow them to stay there longer. You know, for certain parking spaces, it should be uniform. For example, like at the courthouse, you know, you're allowed to tap in there for longer because anybody going to the courthouse is likely going to be in there for longer. So the reasons, there needs to be a justification for changing them. I don't know what they would be for that.
I think you're misconstruing. There's a hotel going up downtown, and the city is going kind of in with it so that we can get parking spaces. But the parking spaces are going to cost the city double what the average.
Oh, okay,
Parking
you're not talking
space.
about rates.
No,
You're
no,
talking
I'm
about
talking
the
about.
spaces.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, is this a subsidy to a large company, or am I missing something?
There's a lot of, I want to say, there's a lot of details involved with that project. And I'm only familiar with those that, you know, came out during the public meetings. But that whole project was put together to receive to achieve a certain end. And it did end up costing more for the parking spaces, as I understand it, because of the additional structural, needs of the hotel. And so, yes, that would be the city agreeing to pay that extra charge to have the hotel.
What lifted up is, I think, a good example of how we can benefit by reviewing our decision-making process so that information is available and explainable in regards to what's happening from a specific project basis. The cost factor that you identified has lots of variables associated with it in terms of how the facility is constructed itself, in terms of the type of concrete system they use, as well as how it's built into the overall construction. The decision to build it that way was made, and so we got the result. And it is higher than it would have been if that hadn't been the case, but that's the facts.
You go ahead, I'll go. You go first.
I would like to draw your attention to Thursday morning's newspaper, a new $7 million affordable house, okay? And it says, Trinity Point is meant to serve as a template for Sioux Falls' fast-growing outskirts. Affordable housing in the outskirts does not have transportation to it, and you have to settle the transportation issue as well as with a new high school. And before I get thrown out, I distributed my other comment things to a mayor's candidate and to the two of you about single serve alcoholic beverages. I will have a personal tutorial about monster houses, and I want to let the sunshine in, so I'm asking this question. Both of you have been involved with the city. What has surprised you the most in your experiences with the city?
There was a lot of questions.
There's a lot of questions. I want to address it in two parts. The first part is, you talked about the housing in the outskirts of the city. Now, I actually see that as a transit issue. But I also see that I see it in a bigger picture, because having worked with the city for that 20 years. And it's where you fixed one problem and you actually created another. Back in the 80s, there was a conscious effort made in the city to not have slums and ghettos. We were learning from our counterparts on the coast that that was a terrible thing, to have these tenement neighborhoods and then have all the structures deteriorate at the same time. So we made a conscious effort to make sure that all of our low-income housing was dispersed throughout the city. And I've stepped back and lived to see the benefits of that, because we believed it was important that we live together side by side and we lift each other up. And so I think it's a good thing that we have low-income housing, dispersed, and I want to see that continue. But then when I was doing my research, to get prepared for the election, and I interviewed each of the directors, I talked to the person who was in charge of transit, and she was telling me about the struggle that they're having with the current transportation issues, because it's simply so costly to try to service the now large expense of the city. And I also, with my background, knew that when we first started the transit system, the buses were free from the federal government. They literally, the funding was, they did heavy funded, they gave all the buses to us. The idea was that as the city grew, the need for the transit system would grow, and eventually it would become self-supported. Well, that never happened, and and then over time, as the city grew, now we have no funding from the federal government, so they've withdrawn all funding, and then the ridership never expanded. So now we do have a problem, but as I see it, I've tried to talk to people about what the solutions might be, and I'm really interested in hearing from anybody who's got some ideas, because there's not a ready one. I mean, they've had task force and everything else looking at this, and it's extremely expensive the way we're doing it right now. But I do view it as a social obligation. It's one of those things at the moment. I don't care how expensive it is. We've got to get the transportation out there. It was something we didn't think about, when we did this, but I still think that was the right way to go. And so until we figure out a less economical way of doing it, we've got to support what we've got, and we've got to get the transportation out to these isolated areas. I think on the horizon, there's some tremendous opportunities. We're not quite here yet, but technologically, smart buses, driverless cars, they're all there. I mean, and it's going to happen way faster than any of us would imagine. Lyft, I think there's some potential there. I think there's some potential with smaller, van-type operations. There are these electronic scheduling systems that can reroute buses right en route to capitalize on the cost of fuels. So the pieces are there, and it's going to take some work, and I was certainly pledged to do that. But I do think from a commitment standpoint, I think we did the right thing by dispersing housing. I think we need to continue that. But now we've got to figure out, how to deal with this issue that we've faced. It was a long-winded answer, but I really wanted to give you the benefit of that history.
What's surprising? What surprised you most when you
Well, actually, I guess one of the things that surprised me as I started to prepare for this election, was some of the things I found that have shifted. I told you earlier, I didn't think the mayoral position had evolved to too much power, but the more I dig into that, the more I do find some surprises that do give me some concern. And I'll just share a couple of them with you, and I'll ask it back in the form of a question to you. As I was, just looking over the structure, as I met with all the department heads, I asked them, I was trying to figure out what changed. I mean, there's a 14-year gap for me I'm trying to fill. And so I was just trying to figure what kinds of things had changed. And having set up the form of government, I mean, I know exactly what we did and why we did it. And here's one of the things that changes, and I'll just ask in the form of a question, does it bother you? There's two things, actually. One, I noticed that the finance department had increased its staff, its head count, 20 employees in 18 years. So I asked them that question, in 8 years. I say in 8 years, it had increased by, so in this mayor's terms, he'd added 20 full-time employees to the finance department. And I asked them the question, the answer I got was, well, they weren't really full-time employees because they were employees that were assigned to each of the major directors, because most of the major directors had someone that was really helping them manage their budget. So now all of those were taken in-house to the finance department. And the question I have is, now, and I've learned that, so now on a daily basis, the director has a budget analyst assigned to him out of the finance department, but he's not really managing his own budget anymore. He's got, the budget is being managed from the finance and i.e. the mayor's office. So there's been a centralization there, which I have a question about. I just question that, and I'd ask you, does that bother you at all? That, because I heard some stories. One of them was right in mid-project, some department had realized that, they were laying down sod and he had to say, roll it up, go home, my funding just disappeared. And went down, went to his computer, his funding was gone. So, two questions. One, you're paying these directors a lot of money, and one of their responsibilities used to be to manage their budget. And they kind of sort of are, but are they really? So that's one of them. The other thing that I noticed, I noticed when I dug into, again, the finances and how that was working, is that the capital improvement plan, there used to be what we call the CIP committee. And the CIP committee had the mayor and or his designee. It had three citizen members, and some of the key directors that spend most of the money. And those individuals were responsible for, under the commission form, for recommending a CIP to the commission. And when we implemented this form of government, we created that committee and put it in place as an advisory committee to the mayor, because the mayor now had that responsibility of putting the CIP together. And at the time, it made sense. But at the time, we couldn't figure out why, we never thought of why any mayor would ever not want to have that committee. Well, I've since learned that under Mayor Munson, the three citizens were taken off of the committee. And then under Mayor Huther, the committee was disbanded altogether. So now there is no CIP committee. There's nobody that's looking at and making a recommendation to the mayor, for how to spend that budget. That's $150 million. And if I'd have known that then, you know, what I know now, and what my recommendation would be on that one does bother me. The other one I'm not sure. I'll ask you whether it bothers you or not, but the mayor has his thumb all over the finances. But this one does bother me. Because in my mind, that's too much money for one person to just be making all of the decision on it and the direction of that money. And if I'd have known, like I said, I couldn't imagine any mayor not wanting that kind of, you know, advice. And if I'd have known that now, and I do know it now, I think it should be a standing committee, like the ethics committee, like the charter revision, one of our formally established committees set up by ordinance, and then with, you would have the mayor and or me, probably the council chair and vice chair, 2 or 3 citizens, and then, you know, figure out what directors need to go on that, or even let the mayor, you know, establish what directors he wants on that. But I think that should be a standing committee that's actually established by ordinance, so that more people, you know, have some input on the front end of that. And so that's a piece that really surprised me when I found that. And for me, I think the fix is there. That kind of institutional knowledge that I have, that I offer. And again, I would ask you folks to talk to me afterwards and give me your thoughts on what you think about those 2 things. But those were big surprises to me, because it's just something you didn't expect.
Would you like me to repeat the question?
Okay, first of all, regarding the housing development that you lifted up, Melanie, I think that's a very good thing.
Gotta hold the mic a little closer.
I do, don't I? There we go. It's scary. Regarding the distributed housing plan that you lifted up, Melanie, I think that's a good thing. I think kids in our community should be able to live in neighborhoods and have parks and schools nearby, and I think that's the way it can happen for all of them. It does lift up the issue you identified with regards to transportation, and so we got to be big as a community and find ways to solve that. You asked me what surprised me or surprises me. I'll use a transportation example. When I was growing up in Sioux Falls, you could sell your house easier if you were able to stay on the bus line. I grew up on the bus line, and the bus driver knew our names, and we didn't even have to pull the switch. He knew where to drop us off. I mean, that was Sioux Falls.
And it was free.
Yeah, almost. I think it was a nickel. And I think this statistic is accurate. During World War II, there were 8 million bus rides a year. Now we're at 1 million. So society has changed too. And we've spread out, we got cars. Living on the bus line wasn't an advantage for people anymore. So I think we have to recognize just the scope of change and the complexity, and not really necessarily surprising me, but totally impressing me that we have to think big. Because we're big. We're big now in Sioux Falls. And we got to deal with it.
One lady back there this way.
I would like to go back to gun control and not call it gun control. We call it common sense gun policy. And there are quite a few in this room, but I'll speak just for myself. I want, as a citizen, to be able to go and show my support for our young people, that we feel their concerns, we hear them, and we want to support them. But I don't want to cause problems with the school districts. I would not want to show up on the 24th and be out there and have ramifications. So I raise that as a discussion point only because lots of us feel for our kids that are having to shoulder this weight, and we somehow need to lift them up as effectively as we can. So because we were talking about gun control, I thought perhaps that might be a time to discuss this. So I would say what do you think about that? How can we be activists in a reasonable manner without causing damage and fallout to our young people?
I'll try that one first. Can you hear me? Okay?
Yes.
Yes. I think it's a really good illustration of where we need what I would call intergovernmental cooperation. And I think that includes certainly the city, the county, the school districts, all 7 of them in Sioux Falls, by the way. The state, there's some people planning to, I think, run for office back there in terms of state legislature. And let's get after it. I mean, I think we need some calls to action and some leadership to do that. And I think there are opportunities out there for people who want to. And I'd like to.
This is one of those issues that I come at from a completely different angle. And I'm going to send you a copy of an article that I read. It was called One Teacher's Way of Dealing with School Violence. And it really focused on this unique way that she had a little system that she put in place, very innocuous, where she asked questions of her students every week on Friday, and they sent her confidential answers. The whole focus of her little thing that was very innocuous, nobody ever know from the questions, was to figure out who's in and who's out, who's being bullied, who's being, who's the bullier, who's sad right now. And she got all this information in a very innocuous way every week, so she had her fingers on the pulse of her students. When I look at the school violence issue, for me, we always, as a natural quick fix, we want to go to the gun control issue. And I think it's more about that. And I'm going to piggyback right back to my mental health issue. When they hit the criminal system when they're adults, we treat them like criminals instead of patients. But we're also falling short at the very earlier stages. Our ADHD kids, our kids with Asperger's, all of our kids that have these mental illnesses that we're identifying earlier. The school system's failing as well. They're not helping them achieve their highest potential, and they're kind of setting them up for some later failures as they go into our system as adults. So I would really spend more of my time and energies, if I could, focusing on that aspect of it and seeing if we couldn't train our teachers to be more intuitive about what's going on and identifying and working very closely with our handicapped children and our children that are struggling, and see if we can't deal with it that way. So, I think both are good, but that's where I would put my energies.
During the last week, we've heard a lot about noise ordinances downtown for places that have condos, townhouses, that type of thing, and bars and good music and stuff. What's your view, and should the noise ordinance be raised downtown, kept the same, or how do you project it so that we keep a lively downtown but be good to our neighbors?
Well, I wrote the noise ordinances, so I am familiar with them. I think it's just one of those classic cases of balance. It's kind of like, buying a house on the golf course and then complaining about the golf balls that go through your window. Okay, so you're gonna live downtown. You're gonna need to accept some level more of noise, but there's a reasonable standards. Maybe it has to be shut down by 10 or on weekdays or 12, at nights, and there's got to be special events. But I think that it's one of those things we have to achieve a balance. But yes, people that live downtown are probably going to have to deal with some of the noise issues in order to encourage that vibrant downtown. So it's just striking that balance.
I thought there was some good conversation, some balance to the conversation that was in the article about what those options might be, and I think they should pursue something that can serve us in the future as a balanced work-life play downtown that we wanted. We need to make things work for people in a reasonable way. I think reasonable and sensible solutions are available, and I think people are willing to work together to accomplish them. I think there's a real tight-knit component to our downtown community, and we should encourage that to be part of the solution.
How do you feel about transparency in government when it comes to taxpayer dollars? Right now, a lot of taxpayer dollars are paid and
He's asking on taxpayer dollars to go to some of these court settlements.
You walked right into one that's really bothering me right now. I've got some issues. Okay, there's really just two simple forms of information, public information and non-public. And the non-public information is so limited. I mean, it's just personnel issues when, someone is involved in disciplinary action and has their private rights to privacy, to have those things dealt with. There's litigation, pending litigation. There's collective bargaining. That's about it. So pretty much everything else the city deals with is public information. And the more I'm digging into this, the more my ire is getting up. Because, I don't want to go off like a rock. But there's a lot of public information that is either becoming extremely difficult to get, or we're being told we can't have it at all. Every contract, once signed, negotiated contracts being under negotiation aren't available. Every signed contract used to be able to just walk up to the clerk's office and ask for a copy of that contract, no questions asked. But I'm finding, that I'm hearing the concerns, and so I'm starting to sniff it out, and I'm not liking what I'm finding. I think that there's just a misunderstanding in government by the council members that a lot of this stuff isn't public when it obviously is. And there should just be a complete
I just saw that court case reported, Jerry, maybe like you do. I think that's the one you're referring to, that the legislature took action regarding, not a court case, but legislative action just in the last day or so. And some interesting comments that were incorporated in it. And so I think there's, there again is the example of how we need to establish on an intergovernmental basis what are the rules of the road. And my recommendation at the city level, like I said at the outset, is that the mayor and council should agree on what information should be available to support the communication and the decision making that it needs to do.
Yeah, I'm Marlon Mala, a Teamster for 35 years. About 3 weeks ago on Inside Kellland, I heard Mr. Jamie Smith over there. He said, we need support about unions. He says, I support him. That was against Mickelson, who's trying to close the university. What is your opinion on collective bargaining, and what would you do once you're our councilman to work to create better relationships with the union people of Sioux Falls?
Well, I support the principles of collective bargaining and the history that it represents, and it's in place in regards to city employees in most cases. I think from my conversations throughout the different departments and opportunities to visit with staff in the city, that there is a keen interest in how that can work effectively in many ways. Certainly from the own personal types of development interest that the employees would have. I think from the standpoint of making sure that the people that take care of the community are taken care of. I think that's a sense of the community as well. And I think there's also the opportunity to do the things that help support that. Right now there's a wage and compensation study being done, so information will be available to ensure fair treatment and consideration for the responsibilities that people carry out. And I'd be full square behind that.
Scott, did you have a short question? You had up.
Well, I think she should.
She has to answer. Oh, I'm sorry.
Again, I harken back to the way things were, not that it was all perfect, but it certainly was different under the 5 mayors I served under than it is right now. As I'm aware right now, I think that, well, I've been told that the city's philosophy with regard to unions is still the same, which is we treated them with complete dignity and respect, recognizing and acknowledging that they serve a tremendous purpose in the fabric of our country, and that they've done a tremendous good. You know, I negotiated all of the collective bargaining agreements for the city during that 20-year period I was there. And there was a point when it was like we were arguing over such minutia that I just, in my own head, I questioned, is there really a purpose for unions anymore? Because they did have a good benefit package. The city's philosophy at the time was slightly higher than average is what the city wanted, you know, to set an example and yet not be, you know, too ineffective with the taxpayers' money. The concern that I have now, though, is that was a different time, and as I was questioning that, I never imagined a day where the high-end salaries are the highest they've ever been, and the low-end salaries are the lowest they've ever been, all across the country. And now, in my mind, from a country standpoint, the unions, we need the unions more than ever. And from the city standpoint, I always thought that we treated them with respect, but if, you know, I want to make sure that nothing has changed philosophically there. And there was an instance where, you know, the mayor I did learn that the mayor refused to pay them during the period where they were in conflict until they resolved and the contract expired. They refused to pay, you know, to do back pay on the salaries, and that was never done. We went into conflict and we always played back pay for that period because it's both parties that are not achieving the result, and it's both parties' failure, so nobody should be punished. So I would, again, just say, I would like to see full respect, you know, return to that process, because that's what I was used to when I did it, and that was my marching orders.
Time for one short question, Scott.
When Jolene was here, I asked her this question, and then since Jolene's been here, and now that you guys are here, the fire department is planning to make sure a lot of their firefighters are ALS trained, which means advanced life support. Right now, as it goes, they can only give basic life support because that's how the contract works with Paramedics Plus. I don't know if a lot of people know that. But the fire department, a lot of times, is showing up to emergencies before they are. So they're moving to try this experiment to go advanced life support. So here's my question. Would you be in favor of moving towards a public ambulance service that's handled by the fire department, or at least willing to look at studying the option?
The fire department's wanted that for years, and when it was discussed, it's discussed every so often. But you know, in the early years, we didn't have the level of training in the fire department that we have now. Our fire departments are all semi-professional. So maybe that discussion does need to be brought up with us. At the end of the day, what you want is to provide the best service on that life and death issue. And what you're telling me is a great concern, because if they're not allowed to use their training, because it makes it not as economic, you know, for our provider if we do the work ourselves and they can't charge for it. But that's a life and death issue. Well, we got to go in favor of the life and death issue. So I would totally be open to looking at that again, but also just knowing that there was reasons why economically it didn't make sense in the past. But again, that was before we had almost every firefighter being fully paramedic trained and everything else. So it definitely is an opportune time to take another look.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would, yes.
I'm sorry, my mind wandered there a minute because I was thinking about the current mayor and opening a Sunday can business. Anyway, we want to thank our candidates. I think they're both going to stay around for a little bit if you want to visit with them. And we've also got Mr. Jameson in the back there. We've got a couple other candidates here. If you'd like to visit, we have this here from Mr. 14 to tell you about the legislature. So,
Tom,
that'll conclude the meeting.
can you remind us all the deadline for voter registration, when early voting starts, and in fact, the date of the election?
I would remind you, but piece of paper with that on it isn't here, so you guys know for sure.
Candidates, somebody do it.
Early voting.
In-person absentee voting starts the 26th. The application to absentee vote is available now.
I could tell you to go on my website and you can get a copy. And the registration date, last date to file your registration is, I believe, the 25th also.
Election date?
And election date, April 10th.
Okay, thank you all for coming, and next week we'll have Paulson.
Folks, anybody else want to entertain us?
We don't come up here to entertain you. We come up here to inform you.
What kind of morons run this outfit?